So this morning we have the positive behaviour support and restrictive practices presentation. It's presented by two lovely people this morning. First, Natasha. Natasha is a proficient behaviour support practitioner with a rich background in supporting individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome. She began her journey with Interaction Services in 2019. Unfortunately, she was a year away, missing the training, all the fun we had all those years ago. And started as a direct support care worker to individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome. Over time, Natasha advanced to roles including key support worker and house manager, where she provided care to individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome across various high support accommodation settings. Since 2021, Natasha has been leveraging her knowledge and experience to provide ongoing tailored support to individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome, as well as their families and support networks in her current role. And secondly, co-presenting with Natasha this morning is Kim. And Kim is a registered psychologist and board-approved supervisor. Kim was first introduced to working with people with PWS in 2009 when she worked as a support worker in a day program setting, well before NDIS and QSC. Since joining Interaction Services in 2015, Kim has supported individuals with PWS and their families and formal caregivers as a behaviour support practitioner. Kim completed the Prader-Willi syndrome professional qualification from the PWS Institute of Germany in 2018. So, welcome aboard.
We've got a lot that we want to try and cover today. Can almost guarantee we're not going to get through all of it. So we do have some handouts that we're happy to share at the end of our slides, and if anyone, there's not enough handouts, there's a lot of people in the room, but we're happy to email them to anybody if anyone's especially interested. So we're going to go first with what is positive behaviour support? So what does positive behaviour support mean to you guys?
Educating the people that are involved with my child's care, like a framework to follow, and consistency, and working like for the individual person with Prader-Willi, not just clumping Prader-Willi as a...
Absolutely. Yep. You got to pick up the pace, Tash. Yeah. Anyone else? Anything to add? Anyone else?
It's proactive support.
Mm-hmm.
What was that, Jamie?
Proactive.
Focusing on their strengths and working with those.
Yeah. Building their skills. Building the system skills around them. It's not just about the person, it's about supporting the people around them.
And it's non-aversive. Doesn't focus on punishments.
Are we clear when we're doing positive behaviour support, or is it kind of hidden what the goal is?
No, it's clear. Very. There's a step-by-step like flowchart what to do.
Situational awareness as well.
Our whiteboard markers are dying already. It's a great start.
The person that probably has their voice and their feelings and taken into consideration on how they want to be managed.
Yeah, giving them some self-determination. Conversely, what isn't positive behaviour support?
Punishment.
Yeah, don't write these ones up, Tish. No. Anything else?
Assuming.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we're going to do the definitions now. Bit dry, that's right. So, as cited in the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Positive Behaviour Support Capability Framework, which is what in Australia behaviour support practitioners work under, the definition is that positive behaviour support is the term used to describe the integration of the contemporary ideology of disability service provision with the clinical framework of applied behaviour analysis. Positive behaviour supports are supported by evidence encompassing strategies and methods that aim to increase the person's quality of life and reduce challenging behaviour. More simply, behaviour support is a person-centred framework for providing support in situations where there is a risk of behaviours of concern. And the overall goal is to make changes to the person's environment and working collaboratively with the person to build their skills, to improve their quality of life, reduce the likelihood of behaviours of concern, and reduce and eliminate the need for restrictive practices. So there's some key principles of positive behaviour support. I don't really like where this land thing is. So it's person-centred. We're helping the person be at the centre of achieving their life goals. We're collaborating with the person and all the key stakeholders to shape the process of change. We're creating a clear plan to ensure shared understanding and accountability across the system. We are focusing on preventative rather than reactive strategies. We're placing the responsibility for changing behaviour on both the person and their supporters. And we use an evidence-based approach to identify the reason for behaviours. And it's a continuous process. It's not a set and deliver. It's an ongoing process of identifying, assessing, planning, implementing, monitoring, and evaluating data. So, you're whiteboarding again. So what are some barriers that people with PWS experience to having a good life, to improving their quality of life?
The fact that food is everywhere. And socially, everything, and it's anxiety, produces anxiety.
Yeah, as Neil was saying, social situations, building relationships, everything's about food. Yeah.
Lack of understanding of what their needs are.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so sorry, Tina.
And I'm not just being mean by making Tash write. My writing is horrendous. We did a test and she went, no, I'm going to do it. Anything else?
Patience and understanding of how they like to interact with people. So,
Mm-hmm.
a friend to socialise, someone might not understand.
Speak up. Speak up.
Project.
Lack of patience.
Lack of patience. Thank you.
What about lack of access to appropriate supports?
100% and 50, I was about to say that. And also the lack of people with the same condition in certain areas. It might only be just a couple, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
Not understanding how much of a threat access to food is
Mm-hmm.
and that it's life and death situation that they're in.
Yeah.
Like the gravity of that, like not understanding that.
Assuming because that they're autistic and therefore people with autism and the strategies used
Mhm.
will work with primarily because that kind of, oh, that looks a little bit ASD-like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Do people want to come? Yep. There's a chair here. Go. Yeah. Also, sometimes overall the behaviours that people can present with in group settings, that we want to improve their quality of life. So, what can we do to help? Now it's Tash's turn.
It is my turn.
Do you want me to click? Or are you happy to click?
I'm happy to click if you want. How do I click?
There you go.
This one? All right, so we'll talk a bit about the behavioural presentation in people with Prader-Willi. So people living with PWS have a set of behaviours that are characteristic to the syndrome. We call them behavioural phenotypes. Now, behavioural phenotypes have both physiological and behavioural manifestations, which are quite distinctive in their profiles. While we do notice that these behaviours are quite characteristic of Prader-Willi syndrome, it is really important to remember that everyone is different. Every person that we support may have that underlying behaviour phenotype that we see, but every single person is going to present it differently and they're completely different to one another. It's also really important to understand the complex relationship between health, well-being and behaviour to support the people that we give care to in receiving the most effective care and the best possible outcomes. I do love an iceberg. I did tell myself I wasn't going to say that I love an iceberg, but I can't help it. I love an iceberg. I love an iceberg. So behaviour is a form of communication. We have our iceberg where we see about 10% at the top. So that's what we see. And what we see is, we might see some absconding, some verbal aggression. We see it's the behaviour itself. But what we don't see, but we need to hold space for, is the why. Why are they engaging in these behaviours? What is it that is driving these behaviours to occur? And then how can we hold space for that to then support them a bit better? The iceberg of behaviour, however, doesn't mean that all behaviours are acceptable if there is an underlying reason for it. Rather, it is a useful way for us to identify potential personal triggers and improving self-awareness for ourselves and the people we're supporting, including their families, caregivers, and friends. So we're going to go through just some common behaviours that we might see. So these are the 3 that we often see and manage, but this is not exhaustive of what people with Prader-Willi might present with. Can we all confirm that we've seen maybe a bit of one of these behaviours at least? Yeah? All right. Or all, yes, absolutely. We'll start with the food-related behaviours. So when it comes to food-related behaviours, I know that we're focusing a lot on the understanding of it's not all about food, but it is something that we should mention while doing behaviour support. So some we might see is excessive talking or asking about food, persistently searching for food, compulsive and overeating, food sneaking or food theft, eating food that isn't normally considered acceptable or non-food items, and eating quite quickly. Additional behaviours around food that we might see is becoming increasingly anxious or agitated in the presence of food, bargaining or lying to obtain food, emotional outbursts when food is denied, becoming aggressive to obtain food, and stealing money to purchase food. Now again, as mentioned, all of this is completely different based on that individual, and we might not necessarily see this across the board. Can you guys give me any examples around ones that you've seen, or anything that you might, any extensions of this behaviour that we've seen while supporting our people with PWS? Phil?
I think an extension on stealing money to access food is stealing items to then get money to then get food. Like
Yeah.
It's, an increased resourcefulness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd just like to say that the technology I love, but I hate it because my daughter can work it better than I can.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
while I try and put things to safeguard, she figures out how to undo them. It gives her opportunity to access money that I've tried to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I found that Uber Eats coming into the picture now. Uber Eats is a big problem at the moment that I've found. And it's that kind of sneaky way that, it's the resourcefulness. It's all very resourceful and calculated, and the way that they obtain food is it's actually quite impressive. So then we've got skin picking behaviours. So skin picking or scratching is quite a common behaviour that we see across the board in people with Prader-Willi. We're not going to get into too much detail. Again, this has been mentioned quite a few times. However, it can be quite a distressing behaviour when it does occur for an extended period of time. And it's quite difficult to manage. Then we've got our emotional outbursts. So we've heard a lot of different names for them. Emotional outbursts, tantrums, meltdowns, bit of everything. But the overarching thing we see is quite consistent across the board. So we might see some rumination, that repetitive questioning, verbal aggression, physical aggression, property damage, and then the increased salivation as well on a lower level. Emotional outbursts may last from a minute to a few hours to a few days. And the outbursts may often end with expressions of regret and distress. Okay.
Some whiteboard stuff for me.
All right. Going into some common triggers. So before we get into the next bit, what are some common triggers that we've seen when working with our people with PWS?
Last minute changes.
Yeah.
Taking from one situation, transitioning to another.
Transitioning, yep.
Task.
Lack of food security.
Food security.
the picture that they have in their head of what they've interpreted, read or heard versus what's actually being said and done, and sometimes even though they're written,
Yeah.
go back to the email, go back to the plan, they're
It's that processing.
processing,
Yeah, absolutely.
expectation. That's so hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
They have a concrete idea of what they want.
Yes. Yep, that rigid thinking. Yeah.
Injustice, if somebody does something wrong that they actually don't like.
Yeah,
or
it's a big one.
perceives, yeah,
Big one.
Calendar event.
Yeah, calendar events. How you going there, Kim?
Not too bad. I'm hoping it's still readable with the heading away
You're
and
fine.
all that kind of stuff.
Any others?
Equality, so fairness, so they see
Inequality, yeah.
friend or another housemate with what they perceive to be a larger portion or
Yeah,
a better outcome or better treatment.
that's a big one.
Quite upsetting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Equality in terms,
Oh,
equality in terms of life, like what Neil was mentioning earlier with people being married and having families and things like that, or seeing their siblings
yeah.
do different things.
Yeah, absolutely. Siblings is a big one. Yep.
And licenses, so, you know, like, yeah, and I don't know about anyone else, but I actually didn't realise that I could have been so liable until the OT told me.
Yeah.
You know, in Queensland, up to $10,000 fine, all insurances
Wow.
are null and void, and if you hurt, that's only for the accident, if you accidentally
Yeah, wow.
injure somebody, that's, and I just went,
That's, yeah.
And we went through a driving school and they didn't even, like, I disclosed she had an intellectual disability and part ability, but they took the money.
They took it and didn't even tell you. Yeah, wow.
So it was hard because this dream and this hope and
All their
goal
aspirations.
of all their friends, and I'm like, yeah, go for your learners, get your ID, do all of that. To just suddenly go,
Yeah, you can't have it. Absolutely. Sorry.
I was going to say fixations or like imperfections, even like degree of choice.
Yeah.
Don't make promises you can't keep.
Huge. Huge. Absolutely.
Self-blame, so they might hold themselves over-accountable to a situation, something might happen and they might feel it's all their fault.
That internal trigger. Yeah, absolutely. Guys, you can do my presentation for me at this rate. This is great. Love it. All right. So, as mentioned, we've mentioned a few of these and a lot more, which is amazing. So some common triggers related to the behaviour presentations that we sometimes see include anxiety and insecurity, often food-based, however, it's also routine-driven and that internal anxiety that they do possess. Routine and staffing changes, especially when abrupt and unexpected. Routine and consistent staff provides that sense of security, that sense of safety and control and comfort for people with Prader-Willi. Negative social interactions, real or perceived, they often have difficulty being told no or when things don't go their way. Expectations of interactions are not often being met and therefore can cause behavioural presentations. Fixed ideas and opinions, so this ties into that idea of egocentrism and the rigidity of thought and that inability to engage with theory of mind and perspective taking. And it's that limited ability to see things from another person's point of view. Yeah. Medical interventions, I've seen this apply to most people with Prader-Willi syndrome, often seeing disagreements between the person with PWS and their medical professionals. Again, I'm sure that it's a lot related to food, but it's also that notion of I know what I'm talking about, and so in order for me to get the best care, you have to follow my instruction, which I've seen quite a bit of. Monetary negotiations, so in relation to food seeking and accessibility to food, some individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome are also collectors of items, so you'll see that they'll have a specific interest and they'll have a lot of that one item or multiple different items. I know we've seen it with a few things like dolls or sunglasses, toilet paper, there you go. Yeah.
bottles.
Yeah, yep. Notions of unfairness again, so this is a big one. Is everyone in the environment receiving the same amount of food? Does someone have one extra P than me? Are they receiving that same amount of attention? Did Kim get that extra 10 minutes of support that I didn't get? Is everyone receiving the same services as everyone else? It's that big notion of unfairness that can cause a trigger point. Confabulation, so a false memory. They might remember a situation or a conversation, not how it actually happened, but that's how they've perceived it, that's how they've processed it, and that's how they remember it. Overpromising, as mentioned, huge, huge. So promises that we do make must be doable and realistic with no room for underlying messages, no room for that grey area. People with PWS are anxious and can misconstrue complicated conversations. So it's really, really important that we're clear and consistent. And if we can't deliver on something, don't make that promise.
It's like the beach story.
Yeah, the beach story, exactly. It's okay to say, I don't know. If you don't know the answer to a question that they ask you, just say, I don't know. It's okay. No matter how many times, I don't know, let's do some research together. How about we both Google it? How about we come up with a few different answers and see which one fits best? Yeah. It can be exhausting.
I'm just laughing.
But
because
yeah.
My daughter, when I got home from last night, said I have to go see the doctor because I've got seasickness now while watching, and I'm not normal, so we have to go see because it can last for a year. I'm just like, let's just take it.
Yeah. Take a step back. Yeah. Amazing. And then we've got psychosis as well. So it's important that we recognise some psychotic symptoms that may occur in people with Prader-Willi, and the impact that these symptoms might have on their behaviour. And then the big one that we all talk about, food. Okay. Thanks. All right, so we've got some internal impacts on triggers. So now that we've kind of identified the common triggers that we might see, what are some things that impact on these triggers? So we've got our internal impacts, which include social skills and the difficulties that they have when socialising with other people. It's that inability to comprehend all social cues, but the desire to want to socialise and to want to integrate into society and want to make friends. Egocentrism and rigidity of thought. So it's that focus that's on themselves, being at the centre of at the problem, at the positive thing, at any situation. People with PWS often struggle with that growth mindset and moving between that rigid brain to the flexible brain. Reflecting on consequences, so there's that difficulty with foresight and perceiving what will happen in the future if they were to engage in a certain behaviour in that moment. Often you'll see that they'll find some benefits of their actions rather than the consequences. Language difficulties, so again, that articulation of how they're feeling, expressing how they're feeling, expressing their emotions, their needs, their wants, their desires. Listening and relating to people in authority. So most people with PWS respect a hierarchy. You'll notice that they respect, within a SIL, for example, they'll respect that house manager. They'll often bypass their staff to go to that house manager because it's that sense of safety and control and comfort. They know best because they're in charge. Often seeking approval and confirmation from others higher up and pitting individuals against one another, in order to get what they want, yeah? And then some unknown personal triggers. We might not actually know what's going on. Again, it's that iceberg. This is what's happening, but really what are they feeling? What have they experienced in the past that might be impacting on how they're presenting today? Then we've got the external impacts. So this could be environment, routine, unexpected events. It comes back to that sense of security and knowing what's about to happen next, knowing that there is structure in their environment, that they do have that safety net beneath them, that pillow that Neil mentioned before. Inconsistency in engagement and how people talk to them. So mixed messages and communication styles can be a huge impact on their behaviours. And again, it completely throws off anxiety and makes them a lot more anxious about what's going to happen. How's their day going to go? How's their day going to go 10 years from now? Are they receiving the same message from everyone? Is there inconsistent communication between this staff and that staff, or mum and dad and my staff. Food-based discussions and or events. So again, each person with Prader-Willi is different. Some people may be able to go to a food-based event and experience anxiety, but have that control to an extent. But rule of thumb is often to try and minimise that food-based discussion and food-related events where possible and where appropriate. Lack of food security, so that increases the anxiety, then increased behaviours, and then the lack of routine as well. Conflict of opinions, so again, as mentioned, arguing with someone with Prader-Willi syndrome can be an absolute trigger. Often they're not hearing what you're saying, and yeah, as John mentioned with his example, it doesn't get anywhere. Yeah, things not going their way, so again, that's that worry about the unknown, and that rigid thought pattern comes back into it. And then life stresses that they often experience themselves and what they perceive as life stresses. But how do we aim to reduce these triggers? It is here. After you.
I'm really conscious of the time, so we're going to probably be rushing through a few.
Sorry, guys.
We should have said at the start, we know we have too much content.
Yeah.
So we will rush through a few, but we can email some stuff. So how do we manage to reduce triggers? Structured environment is the key one that everyone's been talking about as we've been going through this conference. So, and the environment impacts on the behaviours. The more stable the environment, the more stable the behaviours. Look, and it's not foolproof. It's not always going to be like that, but that's what we aim for. We're trying to reduce the triggers. So behaviour will stabilise in a structured, low-stress environment where food security is present, boundaries are clear, and a consistent approach is adopted by everybody involved in their network, formal and informal. But why? Why is it so important? Because the structured environment gives someone safety, security, opportunity for skill development, choice and control where they can, and we're working to help them promote a positive self-image. So clear communication is another key strategy in, I thought we were about to get a bell rung then when Neil started to move. So we need to manage how we communicate and support communication with people with Prader-Willi syndrome. So they're concrete thinkers and they're going to respond positively to concrete outcomes. So Tash tends to use the example sometimes around the idea of saying hop to it. Hop to it's not going to necessarily mean let's get started, let's do this task now. It's not going to mean the same thing. People prefer it concretely. And it's the same as when staff maybe run a bit late. They don't turn up when they're expecting them to turn up, because what's happening then, people with PWS are having to guess what's happening. They're having to try and make sense of why is this staff member not here? What is going on here? Is someone going to come and support me? Do I get to do my activity? Am I going to get my dinner at the time I'm supposed to get my dinner? It just creates anxiety. And most behaviours that result in a loss of self-control will come from a communication breakdown and will have been exacerbated by that anxiety. So then we're going to talk about boundaries a little bit. I don't know if I've got time. We'll do a little bit. Tash and I always bang on about boundaries when we do Prader-Willi training. So why do you think boundaries are needed when supporting people with PWS? Maybe we won't do the whiteboard. No. We don't really have time for that.
Oh, you want us to?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Still answer. We're just not going to do the whiteboard.
Yeah.
I just think they just get really unclear and the anxiety diminishes their capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The
Yep.
processing probably can't process too many options.
Mm-hmm.
So a little direction and guidance in that way.
Yep.
You and I have boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
I need boundaries too, but they need to be clear.
Absolutely.
Yeah, amazing.
Yep.
At the back?
They really need a boundary on, you know, the difference between being a caregiver and a friend.
Absolutely.
What is a caregiver? What is a friend? And defining that relationship
Mm-hmm.
clearly for them as well.
Absolutely. Anyone else?
They get guesswork out of their life a little bit.
Absolutely. Reduces their anxiety. They know exactly what's happening. They know what is expected of them and what they can expect from others, both in caregiving and friendship relationships. Absolutely.
It actually helps them mix themselves with control because they know that there's a boundary there and they actually need it. That
Yep.
safety, it's like that's the buffer.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that boundaries are as much for the people supporting
Yeah.
It's a two-way thing.
Absolutely, because it helps prevent burnout, like staff burnout.
I think they can be quite manipulative, so there has to be boundaries so that a member of staff isn't getting drawn into bringing things that they shouldn't be bringing. Because it becomes small to a much greater extent of, oh, but what about the Lego? What about the cards?
Yeah.
As an extension to that, and then that creates this splitting between staff as well, and you can preference over one over the other. And
Yeah, saving all the really significant behavioural challenges for somebody else on shift that comes on a couple of shifts later. Yeah, absolutely. So personal boundaries are guidelines, rules or limits that a person creates to identify for themselves what are reasonable, safe and permissible ways for other people to behave around them and how they will respond when someone steps outside those limits. They're built out of a mix of beliefs, opinions, attitudes, past experiences and social learnings. And as Damien said, they're important for the people supporting them, not just the people with Prader-Willi. I feel like we didn't need to bang on about boundaries in this session. Everyone's got it nailed. I think we've already kind of covered all this, so I might keep going. It's about keeping everyone on the same page. Everyone knows exactly what's happening. Okay. So the 4 C's: keeping a calm environment, clear and consistent expectations, and avoiding confrontation. Don't get stuck in that loop. Part of the clear and consistent expectations is routines. People with PWS have a preference for routine. Visual supports and schedules can be helpful because this helps reduce anxiety. Predictability increases, anxiety decreases. So the rules and the routines, they lower the anxiety. If changes to the rules and routines are necessary, it's important to give warning and allow them time to process that and to offer choice where possible, where changes have to be made. Limited choice. Always use really clear, literal language and ask questions to check about understanding, because sometimes people with Prader-Willi can appear to have a greater level of understanding than what they do. So sometimes getting them to repeat back what their expectations are can be helpful, as long as they're not just mimicking what you say. Avoiding confrontation is a really clear and consistent way to support somebody. And for instance, try to avoid saying no. Say, we can go to the park tomorrow, rather than, no, we can't go to the park now. Or we can go to the park tomorrow if the weather's fine and it's not a hailstorm and all of that sort of stuff. You're not in Melbourne. So now we're going to move on to more specific strategies for our 3 behaviours of concern earlier. We're going to have to fly through.
Yeah, look, we're gonna skim through this part. Again, you guys are gonna receive the slides. We can even email through a copy. That's not a problem. But we're going to kind of look at the strategies that we put in place, not at the peak of a behaviour, rather in that early warning sign. So good. Okay. So some behaviour management around food-related behaviours. So that's our environmental stuff, like all our structure in our environment. So we might see environmental restrictions. We have that low-calorie, well-balanced diet and regular exercise. Where'd my thing go? Some skim picking. So there are often quite practical strategies to support that skim picking behaviour. So we might see like a routine cutting of the nails, daily use of moisturiser, all that really practical stuff, but it's also about not giving that attention to that behaviour so it doesn't continue to happen and you don't give them that shame, that sense of shame and embarrassment for engaging in that behaviour. Even just keeping their hands busy. If you notice some skim picking, get them to do a Rubik's Cube or be like, oh, I really need some help with something over here. Then our emotional outbursts. So in the early stages of an emotional outburst, that's where we step in. That's where we can come in and give some strategies and try to provide some redirection and try and get them to calm and self-regulate. Often you can mirror back what they're saying to you. If you notice that repetitive behaviour, if you notice that slow escalation coming through, it helps them process what they're saying as well. We've seen the slow counting or deep breathing, so that engages the parasympathetic nervous system and it reduces anxiety to help them calm down. You've got your problem solving, which encourages independence, grounding techniques, so that's mindfulness or redirection. Visual communication, so often if they're ruminating on something, just write something down, show them visually their problem and help them work through it. That visual stimulus helps them process a little bit better. And then, this is my favourite one, the surprise effect.
We've got time for your story.
Yeah, okay, it's a good story, guys, if I say so myself. So, so as mentioned, I was a support worker prior to being in behaviour support, and I supported someone with Prader-Willi syndrome. We were having a behaviour for a couple hours now where they absconded. We had absconded for a long time, just walking the streets. It was nighttime, it was tiring, they weren't regulating, and we just weren't able to solve the problem. So a few hours went by, and then I heard some thunder. And this is 12 a.m. And we're not too close to home, but we're close enough. And so I hear the thunder, and I was like, how do we go home before the rain hits? So we're walking, and we're still ruminating. And so I just turned around and I went, oh my gosh, did you hear that? My hair's going to go curly. I spent an hour and a half straightening my hair this morning, and now it's going to rain. I'm not going to be okay. Completely broke the circuit because it was so out of the norm. It's not at all what we were talking about, but it helped provide that redirection. It was that circuit breaker for, oh my God, are you okay? We need to get you home. Like, your hair, it can't go curly. And so then they were so focused on helping me at that point to get home to make sure my hair didn't go curly and I didn't have to spend another hour. And then when we got home, I was provided some education by my participant in regards to, did you actually know that the time between a thunder and a lightning strike will tell you how long the rain, until it's about to rain? And I was like, no clue, no idea, thank you though. So it's, yeah. Absolutely, yeah, and out of it, it's out of that loop, yeah, and honestly, they were absolutely great for the remainder of the time, and they thanked me for being like, oh, thank you for getting me home. And it was lovely. But the surprise effect can be flickering the lights, just to throw off that sensory stimulus, or breaking out into song and dance, just randomly because they're confused. They're like, this is out of the norm. All right, I'm gonna fly through this.
Yeah,
Sorry, guys. We'll get through this. So our escalation cycles, so people with Prader-Willi will often see that they peak really quickly, and then that de-escalation process is a little slower. I'm not going to go through this. It's there. We'll provide you the slides. So sorry, guys. And this is a bit of a recap. So this is our approach. So it's really important that we're aware of our goal when supporting someone with PWS, that we take the lead, not in a domineering way, but rather give them that comfort and security in knowing that you know how to best support them. What can you do? So again, just remembering that you can give space, you can apply all these strategies that we've just gone through, and we can act on our boundaries. Be self-aware, so keeping calm and knowing that your emotions are going to impact on that person that you're supporting as well. So how you respond will impact on how they respond, and vice versa. Language, so again, we've gone on and on about being clear, consistent, calm, confident, and firm. And then interrupting the line of thinking, so that's your surprise effect. Try and redirect the problem, and then divert the thoughts as well. The fun stuff.
I was like, now the most exciting part. Okay, so far we've spoken about the positive practices that we put in place when we're supporting people with Prader-Willi. That is evidence-based, least restrictive method of supporting someone to increase their quality of life and therefore decreasing frequency and severity of challenging behaviours. But what happens when that's not enough? So before we get into it, in the limited time that we have, just a disclaimer, we work in New South Wales, so we can't talk about the other spaces in around Australia, but we will do our best to be clear about the New South Wales stuff as much as we can. So what are the types of RPs? I know we've already got them up there. So we've got chemical restraint, mechanical restraint, environmental restraint, physical restraint, and seclusion. Did anyone come to the restricted practice presentation in here yesterday by an adult with Prader-Willi? Yeah? It was really good.
Yeah,
it was
amazing.
great. It was really good. Mine's a little bit drier, unfortunately. So what are some restrictive practices that you guys have seen supporting someone with PWS?
What kind?
What kind? Tell me more.
Restricted access to kitchen and money.
Yep. Anyone else?
Access to money.
Yep.
Money?
Yep.
Access to the community on their own.
Yeah, absolutely.
Access to shops.
Mhm. Mhm.
Physical restraint during like the peak escalations.
Mhm. Yep.
Access to internet.
Yep.
Medication.
Yep. Mhm. Yep. Seclusion. Anyone seen seclusion for Prader-Willi? I see it.
Not for a long time.
Yeah.
Yep. What about mechanical restraint? We didn't say any mechanical restraints.
Like locks and stuff.
Yeah. Cool. Hey, see, we're firing through the slides now. I like it. Okay. So environmental restraint. The definition of environmental restraint is that it is a restriction of a person's free access to all parts of their environment, including items or activities. So some examples we've already spoken about. So restricted access to kitchen, locked front door, restricted access to community, restricted access to money. Oh, we spoke about all of them. Great. And so some of the behaviours that they're usually in place to manage is food seeking, absconding, food seeking from rubbish bins when in the community, purchasing excess food, especially if unsupported. Anything else that you guys want to add to that?
Just a quick one about rubbish bins. I had a bin surfer. Councils can provide you with lockable bins.
Amazing.
So you can actually ring your council and they can give you a lockable bin. You can have a key for, but it actually is one of those tippy bins that puts into the rubbish.
Ah, okay.
You can actually, it's definitely in New South Wales, right, square shaped bins.
Mhm.
Yeah, but you can get lockable bins.
And so that,
It's free.
oh, even better. And that means so when the garbage man comes, it's still,
Yeah, it just opens because of the angle of the tipping. That it was a saving grace.
yeah, amazing. Okay. Anyone else want to add anything? No? Cool. So chemical restraint, the use of medication or chemical substance for the primary purpose of influencing a person's behaviour, does not include the use of medication prescribed by a medical practitioner to treat or enable the treatment of a diagnosed mental disorder, physical illness or physical condition. Again, a bit dry, it's a definition from the Quality and Safeguards. So there's a few different examples of various types of chemical restraints. I've put the names of medications here just for representative purposes. So routine medications such as Topamax, which that is sometimes prescribed to help manage skin picking. You've got routine medications such as risperidone to help with emotional outbursts, especially physical aggression. Then you got your PRM medications, again, usually for the same sort of purpose. And then sometimes you can have routine medications such as Lovan, which is an SSRI, to help manage anxiety behaviours. The disclaimer that I've put down the bottom is about it depends on what the medical practitioner has identified as the primary purpose. As behaviour support practitioners, we don't make that call. We have to follow what they say. It's always fun when we get stuck between them and the Quality and Safeguards. So sometimes if you get a medical practitioner that says they're on an anxiety medication, but people with Prader-Willi who have heightened anxiety can also have a separate anxiety diagnosis, then it's not necessarily counted as a restricted practice.
So sorry, just to get that clear, we need to get
I'll do my best.
our kids diagnosed with an anxiety disorder in order to not have to do restrictive practices when they're prescribed a medication.
Such as that.
Anti-anxiety.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
What about risperidone? Because that can be used for so many different things and
Mhm.
so many different conditions.
Mhm.
Any highlights? How do I educate my GP?
Honestly, it's a constant battle, and we're constantly trying to educate the medical system, I
Yeah.
guess.
Have you seen the medication purpose form on the Quality and Safeguards website?
It's been tagged. I've yet to get to. But
Yeah, because it's a bit wordy, but there's a bit of a blurb on the front that explains why we're asking these questions, and then you can take it in and they can just fill it in. That's right. Sometimes you'll do that, I've had it, we've pre-filled it with all the medications that we know people on, they've just got a ticket, and you take it into them and they're like, oh no, we're not filling that in. We're not going to do that, which is then we're like, okay, cool, so what do we do now? But then I've had the opposite where I've emailed it and they've emailed back going, oh, this medication's for XYZ. And then that's sufficient, that's your written documentation to then not have to do it as a restricted practices. But yeah, the to and fro is painful.
About the wording.
Yeah. Welcome to the grey area that we tell people not to do for people with Prader-Willi. Anyone else? No? So mechanical restraint. So I put environmental restraint first because that's the most common one that we see, and then chemical restraint is probably the next most common one that we see. And then we've got mechanical restraint. So the use of a device to prevent, restrict or subdue a person's movement for the primary purpose of influencing a person's behaviour. Mechanical restraint does not include the use of devices for therapeutic or non-behavioural purposes. So if the therapeutic or non-behavioural is, say, someone has guardrails on their bed, like maybe they fall out of bed all the time, that's not a restrictive practice because it's not managing a behaviour of concern, it's purely therapeutic. But some examples of mechanical restraint, so a seat buckle guard. So it might be to prevent physical aggression to others while in a vehicle, absconding from the vehicle. A car harness, physical aggression to others while in the vehicle or absconding from the vehicle. And restrictive clothing. So sometimes guys have the onesies to stop them being able to rectal pick. Any questions about that?
Think you're clever and you've just
And I've also made a little disclaimer down the bottom, is always review the Safe Transportation Guide for car-related, regulated, restrictive practices, because I've had some back and forth around that lately that we do not have time to get into. Not at all salty, that's fine. Then we've got physical restraint. The use or action of physical force to prevent, restrict or subdue movement of a person's body or part of their body for the primary purpose of influencing their behaviour. Physical restraint does not include the use of a hands-on technique in a reflexive way to guide or redirect a person away from potential harm or injury consistent with what reasonably would be considered the exercise of care towards a person. If someone is about to step out in traffic and they don't have road safety awareness and you hold their hand to stop them, that is not a restrictive practice. That is a usual expectation of care for somebody to keep them safe. But there are obviously some physical restraints. So one-person hold, that can be to prevent skin picking, eating non-food items. Two-person hold, again, skin picking, eating non-food items. Physical aggression towards others, that sort of stuff. And again, I like my disclaimers. I didn't realise quite how many disclaimers I put into the presentation. Yeah, absolutely. Any authorisation and implementation of physical restraint requires further training around implementing practices by an accredited training company. And lastly, seclusion. Obviously, we don't see it very often because there's one example. So it's the sole confinement of a person with a disability in a room or a physical space at any hour of the day or night where voluntary exit is prevented or not facilitated, or it is implied that voluntary exit is not permitted. So the example that we give here is staff withdrawing to a locked office and the person with PWS cannot leave their property. So if there's a locked front door and staff go to the office and lock themselves in response to a behaviour of concern, that could be classed as seclusion. Even though it's not taking the person to their room and telling them they can't leave out of their room, which is usually the historical definition of seclusion, if they are in a space that they cannot get out of and you have removed yourself and locked yourself away, that is seclusion.
Yeah. That's exactly what it is, yeah.
So then behaviour might be in place to address. So physical aggression, throwing objects such as bodily fluids and sharp objects at staff. And which is really hard because we know in Prader-Willi you remove the audience. And if you remove the audience, it can help them regulate. But if they have a locked front door to manage other behaviours of concern and removing the audience as you go to the office, tips over into seclusion. Good times, eh? Okay, so... Oh, we need a squeaker. We don't have one. Okay, so how have restrictive practices changed? In the past, they were often seen as a first response, but now we have to do them as a last resort. And there was always goals and legal requirements to avoid restrictions wherever possible, minimise the frequency of use and the impact of the person, and have a plan for the reduction of restrictive practices over time. Oh, we're really flying now for 2 minutes, holy dooly. 3 requirements in New South Wales. You have to have a behaviour support plan developed. You have to have informed consent by the participant or their guardian, and authorisation is approved by an RPA panel through an internal policy and procedures of the individual NDIS provider. I assume, was that the same sort of thing in Victoria now? No? Yeah? Okay. Okay, I'm going to fly through. Do you?
That goes
Fade out, we really don't have time for fade out plans.
Jump in.
No to go? Okay, cool. So we have to have a starting point. Where are we going with the start of a fade out plan? And what needs to happen for us to start fade out? What skills does the person need to develop or do the staff need to develop to be able to do fade out? Collaboration, who's involved? What are their responsibilities? How are we going to plan it? We don't do it ad hoc. We're like, oh, we'll try this today. No, we do it planned and structured and step down. Has to be logical steps, step by step by step. And a constant process of monitoring, reviewing and adjusting. What do we need to change? What's working, what's not working, and how do we go from there? Oh.
And this is a recap. Thanks, team.
And we're done.